Welcome to my 234th video on my work with OO gauge. The subject of this video will be mainly various messing around with Hornby Dublo 3-rail models of the LMS Stanier 8F heavy freight engine. I'll also be putting some coal loads into Dublo wagons, and while I'm at it, adding coal loads to a couple of Dublo N2 tank engines. I'm very fond of the Dublo model of the Stanier 8F. It provides another Dublo 3-rail engine very apt to my preferred prototype of pre-war LMS operations, and more than that, the way this model was designed, with plunger pickups in the tender picking up power from the centre rail and passing that power to the motor in the locomotive, means that the tender from this model can be readily used to adapt 2-rail models for 3-rail running. Because of this, I've basically bought 3-rail 8Fs whenever I've come across them at a reasonable price, acquiring about half a dozen examples by now, and using tenders from 8Fs to get a Black 5, a Jubilee, a Princess Royal, and a 4P compound running on my 3-rail tabletop. The 8F was introduced to the Dublo range quite late on, in 1958. It was available in 3-rail and 2-rail, but so far as I know was only ever sold in BR black livery. This is how it came as a standalone engine. It was also available in the G25 L.M.R. 280 freight train set, which was how I acquired my first example. This is actually the latest example that I bought on eBay, seen here as it was sold in BR black. This is another example that I acquired recently. This one is a bit of an oddball, as it's fitted with a Ringfield motor. The 3-rail Dublo 8Fs normally came with an X04 type motor, although later 2-rail versions were sold with the Ringfield motor. This appears to be an example of the 2-rail Ringfield 8F introduced in 1961, which has been converted for 3-rail running. This makes it something of a rarity, as only a few hundred of these were sold, apparently. Here you can see the back of the Ringfield motor in the cab. You can also see the somewhat bodged connection that's been used to connect the centre rail power from the tender to the loco. This example has the later plastic simplex couplings. It has a coupling fitted to the front pony truck, which was only introduced with the 1961 version. Earlier examples had no front coupling. Unfortunately, the front coupling on mine is broken. This is my earlier 3-rail version. The back of the motor is still visible in the cab, but the X04 is less obvious than the Ringfield. The original connecting wire arrangement is much neater. The wire from the loco plugs into a square hole in the front of the tender. This earlier version is fitted with a metal rear coupling, and there is no simplex coupling at the front, just a slightly crude chain link coupling on the buffer beam. The later version kept the hook on the buffer beam but omitted the chain, as that would have interfered with the simplex coupling. I wanted to put another 8F into service pulling freight trains on my 3-rail tabletop. I wasn't sure which one to use. As mentioned, I'd bought half a dozen overall, so I had several 8F locos currently sitting idle, their tenders having been borrowed for 2-rail conversions. This one seen here was the very first 8F that I got in the G25 train set. I checked it in the servicing cradle with my bench power supply to see if it was still running okay. It seemed to run pretty well, with power applied to the wire from the tender and to the chassis. I had previously rebadged this example as an LMS loco, built at Crewe in 1937. This is another 8F loco that I had around the bench, having stolen its tender for a conversion. You can see here the way the wire to the tender is fitted with a plug-in contact. And here's another example sitting on the bookshelves. Seen here is the only 8F that I had currently running on the railway at this point. This one came to me like this, already repainted in gloss black and rebadged as an LMS engine. I got my most recently acquired example, the one that was seen in its box at the start of this video, onto my tracks to see how well it would run. So I wanted to try and compare these 8Fs to see which might be the best runner. Of course, it's not really a fair comparison, I suppose, since some of them have had some servicing by me and some haven't. This one is I think, the very latest one I bought, and has had notes. It's the one that I just showed in the box, not the one with the Ringfield motor. And this, of course, is still in its British Railways livery. I thought this one ran quite well on my test track. It seemed to run quite well, but you know, I don't know whether you can see that, but I'm running him at 80% power on the Gauge Master controller here. I don't think he's going to run with a lot less than that. Turn him down to 70 now. Now he's been running for a bit. So that's 70% power. Well, I suppose that's still he's tending to get stuck under the tunnel there, the trying to lift the tunnel and clean the track under the tunnel. Not that it's so long since I did that. I tell you, I clean this track all the time because it does get dirty easily, this Dublo track. It's not like, you know, well, modern nickel silver track can get dirty as well, but this gets dirty quicker, honestly. Anyway, so I wouldn't say that wants to run a lot faster than 70%, a lot less power than 70%, okay. See, that's 60%, and he's slowing down to the point where he's probably going to get stuck on that slightly dirty patch under the tunnel. Yes, he did. No, oh, he managed to slide through just, but I'll clean that before I do another one. But anyway, so there he is. He can just about get round at 60% power, but not too enthusiastically. Next, I tried the version with the Ringfield motor. Unfortunately, I couldn't get this to run on the tabletop at all, although I had managed to get it to run a bit on the test track, albeit jerkily and with a lot of power. I took the Ringfield version back to the bench and tried it in the servicing cradle. I was able to get the motor to turn, but clearly this one is going to need some serious servicing if it's ever going to be a good runner. So I basically dropped it from the current process at this point, as I figured I'd focus on getting the best runner into operation first. I undid the screw holding the drawbar to the tender on the latest version from the box. You can see here the wire still plugged into the front of the tender. I don't know why that wire is green. Black would be more usual, I believe, and better as being less obvious during running. I plugged the wire from my original 8F from the train set into the tender from the newest example. As you can see, the wire from the loco in this case is black. Then I screwed the end of the drawbar of this loco to the tender. I checked it with my bench power supply. It seemed to run okay with power applied to a centre rail pickup on the tender and to the chassis of the loco. I got this combination onto my 3-rail tracks to evaluate the running of this loco. This is my original 8F. The very first one I got actually in a heavy freight train set. And he was there running at 100 on the Gauge Master controller because I needed 100 to get him started. I just turned him down now. I just turned him down to 90 now. As he warms up, he's getting going a bit more. Now, I did service this one back when I got it. They all seem to have great trouble going through that tunnel, although it only is just simple dirt on the tracks because I've cleaned the tracks, so now I'm down to 80%, which is about what I was running the other one at. He's now down to 80% on the Gauge Master controller. Still struggling with that going through that curve under the tunnel. I think it's something a little bit more mysterious about the track there than straight dirt, because I've cleaned all 3 rails aggressively through there, and both this one and the other one still slow down there. There's something about the track, maybe it's a little uneven, or there's something that just creates a little bit of an interference. Let me try turning him down to 70. He's really slowing down at 70. This is on the gauge master. I don't know if he'll get through the tunnel. He's just about straight through, but then the other one's straight through at 60. I don't know. Uphill work, aren't they? Anyway, I don't think he, no, in fact he barely got through there at 70. I don't think there's any way he's going to get through the tunnel at 60. Turn him down to 60 and see, where is he? Okay, that's 60, but he's almost stopping at 60. So I think you'd have to say, yeah, not surprisingly. Look at the jerky way they're running in that tunnel. It's really odd. It's really quite odd. Yeah, I don't know what goes on there. We'll turn him back up to 75, get him going. Anyway, so I mean, he's not running too badly, and I could service him again, although I've already serviced him, but right now I think you'd have to say that the latest one is the best runner out of the 3, and the Ringfield needs some severe servicing. He barely runs at all. Based on my tests so far, I decided for the moment to go ahead with converting the latest example for LMS operations, as that loco seemed to be the best runner. First, I needed to remove the British Railways markings. The markings on these models were tampo printed, and I've found that the best way to remove them is to use methyl hydrate on cotton buds. With care, it's generally possible to remove the tampo-printed markings without stripping the underlying paint. In this case, the lion came off quite easily, but it took rather more rubbing with methyl hydrate to get all of the gold off. Here's one side of the tender with the BR crest gone. I washed with plenty of water to remove remaining methyl hydrate. Then I did the same thing on the other side of the tender. Again, the lion came right off, but it took quite a bit of rubbing to get all of the gold off. There was something of a mark left, but it wasn't too obvious after a good wash. I was a bit of 2 minds as to what to do about the loco markings. When the LMS 8Fs were taken into British Railways stock upon nationalisation in 1948, a 4 was added in front of the 4-digit LMS running number, so this loco would have had the LMS number 8158. I initially just removed the initial 4 from the cab sides, and I also removed the initial 4 from the smoke box door. But I decided that the result of that didn't look good, so I went ahead and completely removed the numbers from the cab sides, just leaving the 8F power rating mark. Here are the loco and tender at this point after removal of the BR markings and some cleaning up. I had press-fix decals on hand, but doing the running numbers 1 digit at a time with press-fix decals is very tricky. I had some waterslide decals for LMS loco markings on order from Fox Transfers. Well, I'd paid for them and I was waiting for them to come, so I thought that I would wait for those to arrive and try them for marking this model. I thought that it should be easier to precisely position the digits of the running numbers with waterslide transfers. I'd recently acquired this Dublo tin plate brake van, and I thought that I would add LMS lettering to it to use it in my freight train. I had Model Master waterslide decals for LMS wagon lettering. I also had HMRS press-fix decals for LMS wagon markings. I decided I would use the Model Master waterslide decals for this van. Unfortunately, these decals are white, and they come on a backing sheet which is blue but so pale as to be almost white, so it's very hard to make out what you're doing with these decals. It's almost impossible to see the individual decals on the sheet unless you hold the sheet up to the light. This seems kind of dumb to me. Couldn't they have used a backing sheet in a colour that allowed you to actually see the individual decals? I separated out the individual LMS letters, as they were much closer together on the sheet than they needed to be on the van. And I applied letters to the side of the van, using some microset to assist. The waterslide decals took quite readily on the smooth sides of the tin plate wagon. That should be a ducket in the middle sticking out from the side of the van, but it's just printed flat on this tin plate model. Here is that van with its new LMS marking. I had bought these 6 super detailed Dublo open wagons a while ago. Here are the ends of the boxes for those. And here's the info on the side of the box. Although they came in blue boxes, these wagons could apparently be run 2-rail as well. And here are those 6 wagons out of their boxes. These have cast plastic bodies rather than tin plate, but their chassis are still metal, and they have metal simplex couplings fitted. They appeared to be in good condition. I wasn't going to mark these wagons, but I did want to put loads into them. I found a kitchen sponge that was about the right thickness to fit into the wagons. I marked the sponge for the length of the wagon. Then I used scissors to cut a strip of sponge, the end of which would just fit into the wagons. It wasn't necessary to get this exactly precise, as the sponge could be compressed a bit. Next, I cut that strip of sponge into sections about 2/3 of the depth of the wagons. This allowed me to fit a piece of sponge into each wagon, taking up much of the volume. I spray painted the sponge pieces black, as I thought that the light blue would show up too much. With those painted sponge sections back in the wagons, they could almost have passed as loads without further addition. But I was intending to add coal on top. I put the wagons onto a piece of paper and sprinkled coal into each wagon on top of the sponge. Next, I got out rubbing alcohol and diluted white glue to fix the coal loads. I sprayed the loads with alcohol as a wetting agent so that the glue would flow, and then applied the dilute white glue with a pipette. I put plenty of glue into each wagon, as this is necessary to fix the coal, and though the glue may show white when applied, it will dry clear. Whilst I was doing this, I thought that I should also do something about coal loads for my 2 N2 tank engines. The Dublo N2 models mostly came with no kind of coal load at all, as seen here, though I believe some kind of coal load might have been added to very late examples. Some care would be required, as the back of the motor sticks directly up to the coal bunker, and I didn't want to get bits of fluid into the motors. I cut pieces of sponge to fit into the N2 bunkers. I took those and sprayed them black. Whilst I was waiting for that black paint to dry, I turned my attention back to the 8F loco. This model originally had the running number 48158, meaning its LMS number would have been 8158. That would make it a loco built in 1943. Given that I principally model pre-war LMS operations, I wanted to use the number of an earlier example. The first LMS 8Fs were built at Crewe from 1935 to 1937 and carried the numbers 8000 to 8026. I removed the running number from the smokebox door. The little numbers on the smokebox door are tricky to do. It would have been easiest if I could have found a single decal to apply the entire 4-digit running number, but I couldn't. I had some waterslide decals for wagon running numbers in white, which were about the correct size. I was able to find the digits 0, 2, 3 together, so I could make up a running number for a crew 8F using one decal for 0, 2, 3, and then a second decal to add an 8 in front. It was tricky cutting the individual digits out of the wagon numbers, and I didn't get it 100% right, but still I was reasonably happy with this attempt. Next, back to the coal loads for the N2s. The sponge pieces had been sprayed black and had now dried. I decided to try to put coal on top of the sponge pieces outside of the locos, as I didn't want to risk getting bits of coal and glue into the motors. I sprinkled coal on top of the sponge pieces, then applied some alcohol and then watered down white glue with a pipette. Then I left the pieces for the glue to dry. I put the pieces into the bunkers of the two N2 models. One of them worked okay. Too much of the coal came off the other, so I had to add a bit of coal back and risk applying a little alcohol and glue directly to the piece in the loco bunker. Once everything dried, I thought these loads looked pretty good, certainly a lot better than just having completely empty coal bunkers. Here are those two N2 models with their new coal loads on the tabletop. I did run them both to confirm that I hadn't messed anything up. I was relieved to find that both still ran well. For some reason, the N2 seems, in my experience at least, to be one of the best running Dublo locos. The one problem it does have is that the centre rail pickups are positioned far forward to avoid the gear on the driving axle. So the front centre rail pickup is actually in front of all of the wheels and tends to cause sparks going round curves, especially over points. I don't really see how that can be fixed, and it doesn't actually stop the loco running. Still, it always worries me a bit seeing sparks under a loco as it goes round. Back to the 8F. This is a picture of one of the first batch of 8Fs built at Crewe as it originally went into service with the LMS, and I used this picture to guide me in marking my latest model. I had wanted to wait for the Fox waterslide decals to arrive, but after the end of the 3rd week after I paid for them and came and went, I got fed up waiting and went ahead with marking the model using press-fix decals. The press-fix decals are really fine for the lettering on the tender. LMS letters came in 2 spacings on the HMRS sheet, but the wider spacing was too wide for this tender and the narrow spacing too narrow, so I had to cut the letters out and apply them individually, which I did, placing them based on pictures of actual locos from the first Crewe batch. A sharp knife is used to cut the backing on the HMRS sheet around the letter, then one corner of the backing is teased up with the knife, and tweezers are used to get hold of the backing, peel the decal from the sheet and place it on the model. Once the decals are pressed into place, the backing is wetted with water and can then be removed. Here's the other side of the tender after that process. Not perfect, but not too bad. Doing the cabside numbers was much trickier. It's hard to place the press-fix digits precisely, as you can't really see clearly through the backing. I put a piece of masking tape on to make a baseline. I applied the outer 2 digits first and then made pencil markings on the tape at the centre of those 2 digits. Then I measured the distance between those 2 pencil marks with calipers. I divided that distance by 3 and made pencil marks for the centre 2 digits evenly spaced as best as I could. Then I placed the centre 2 digits, centering them on the pencil marks. Even then, the result didn't look quite right to me, but I don't know what else I could have done. I put my piece of tape onto the other side of the cab with the pencil marks centred. and I applied digits to this side of the cab, centering each digit on its corresponding pencil mark. I guess I can live with this, though I still suspect that I could do better with waterslide decals, as they make adjusting the exact position easier. The colour of the power rating also doesn't match, but I didn't have new decals for that. I might redo it at some point. I coupled loco and tender back up again. I tested with power applied to a centre rail pickup and to the loco chassis, actually to the drawbar in this case. The model ran okay. I got it onto the tabletop and tried it running round. It ran quite well, and I was fairly happy with how it looked. I coupled this newly finished 8F up with the wagons I'd been working on. Here's the engine ready to head off with its train. Here are the front 3 wagons with their loads. There's still a bit of blue sponge visible in this flash picture, but it isn't really noticeable normally. Here's the back of that train with the newly marked brake van. So now I'll just finish with a quick view of that train running.